He brought another woman to our family barbecue, dropped down on one knee, and proposed. The kicker? We were still married, and our toddler was watching. But he had no idea who he was messing with, or how far I'd go to protect my son. The smell of grilled ribs and fresh corn on the cob hung in the warm July air as I arranged folding chairs around the back patio. Our yard wasn't fancy, just an old picket fence, a creaky swing set, and some potted sunflowers. My son, Aiden, helped me plant in spring. It was the kind of yard that said family more than money, and that suited me just fine. I'd been running around since morning, checking the burgers, filling up ice chests, laying out paper plates with red checkered napkins. It was our annual summer barbecue, the one where all sides of the family came together. My folks, his folks, siblings, a couple of cousins. Loud, messy, always a little chaotic, but it was ours. Or at least, it used to be. I hadn't seen Cole in over 3 weeks. My husband. Well, legally still my husband, though if you ask my heart, it had been fading for months. He said he'd been staying downtown for work lately, some new consulting gig that required him to be near the city. Long hours, late nights, always vague on the details. I wanted to believe he was just busy. I needed to believe it, for Aiden's sake. My parents were the first to arrive. My dad brought his famous deviled eggs, and Mom had baked a peach cobbler that made the whole car smell like summer. I smiled, hugged them, and tried not to let my nerves show. I'd invited Cole, even though I wasn't sure if he'd show. I figured if there was any hope of saving this, he'd at least come see his son. Aiden was 3 and obsessed with dinosaurs and airplanes. He had Cole's eyes, which made it harder some days. By 3 p.m., the yard was full of chatter. My brother Noah was manning the grill, flipping hot dogs like a pro. Kids chased bubbles near the fence. Someone had brought sweet tea, and someone else brought too much potato salad, just like every year. I was holding Aiden on my hip when I saw the black SUV pull into the driveway. Not his usual truck, not anything I recognized. Cole stepped out in a button-down shirt, hair styled like he was heading to a dinner party. But what made my chest go cold wasn't him. It was the woman stepping out behind him. Young, maybe mid-20s. Tall, slim, red dress, way too polished for a backyard gathering. She held his hand like it was hers to hold, and I felt my stomach turn. He didn't even look embarrassed. Just walked right up like this was normal. "Hey, Tess," he said, like we were old friends. "Everyone, this is Jade." People went quiet, the kind of quiet that makes your ears ring. My dad narrowed his eyes. My mom clutched her purse a little tighter. Noah stopped flipping burgers mid-sizzle. I smiled the way women do when they're about to fall apart, but need to keep the peace. I set Aiden down on the grass and said, "Nice of you to join us." Cole looked around like he owned the place. Then, and I swear, I will never forget this for as long as I live, he turned to Jade, pulled a ring box from his pocket, and dropped down to one knee. "Jade, you've made me realize what I want. You're my future. Will you marry me?" Aiden clapped, thinking it was a magic trick. My mother gasped. Someone dropped a soda can. My legs didn't buckle, though I thought they might. I didn't cry. Not in front of my son. Not in front of my family. Jade squealed and said yes. She actually said yes. I walked back into the kitchen, slow and steady, like a woman in a dream. I didn't know what I was grabbing. Maybe paper towels, maybe sanity, when Noah followed me in. "Tess, what the hell is going on?" he asked, keeping his voice low. "Are you two even divorced yet?" "No," I said. That was the hardest part. No paperwork, no warning, just this public ambush at our own family barbecue. My father followed a moment later, face tight with that calm, angry dad look he wore when someone insulted his daughter in Little League. "You want me to make him leave?" he asked quietly. I shook my head. No. Let him finish his little show. Out in the yard, Jade was showing off her ring. It looked expensive, not just flashy, seriously expensive. Aiden had wandered toward the swing set, kicking a soccer ball around by himself. That's when I knew. This wasn't just about cheating. This wasn't about falling out of love or someone new catching his eye. Cole had been planning this, calculating it. He brought her here, to our space, on purpose, to humiliate me, to draw a line in the sand. Maybe he thought I'd roll over, cry, leave quietly, but I wasn't raised that way. I walked back out, picked up Aiden, and said loud enough for every soul to hear, "You didn't tell your fiancé we're still married?" Cole blinked. Jade's smile faded. "Oh," I added, smiling sweetly. "And just so you know, Cole, the money you used for that ring? We'll be talking about that in court." And with that, I turned, took Aiden inside, and started planning the next move. Because he'd fired the first shot, but I wasn't done, not even close. That night, after everyone had gone home, I sat on the edge of my bed with a legal pad and an aching heart. Aiden was asleep, his little arms wrapped around his favorite stuffed dinosaur. The house smelled faintly of smoke from the grill, and the garbage can was still full of paper plates and uneaten coleslaw. I hadn't had the energy to clean it all up. I kept replaying the moment in my mind, the way Cole smiled as he dropped to one knee, like he was proud of himself, like this was something romantic, not cruel, not reckless. Jade had looked so thrilled, holding her left hand up like she'd just won the lottery. Maybe she had no idea, I thought. Or maybe she just didn't care. I scribbled down everything I could remember, dates, bank transactions I needed to check, my lawyer's phone number, the one my dad had given me 6 months earlier when things first started to feel off. I hadn't used it then. I kept hoping things would get better. We'd had our problems, sure. Money was tight, and Cole had been distant. But we had a child, a house, a history. I wanted to believe in second chances. Not anymore. Around midnight, I finally opened the banking app on my phone. Our joint account, the one we used for groceries and Aiden's daycare, had less than $400 in it. The last 3 withdrawals had all come from Cole. 2 from some high-end jewelry store in the city, 1 from a hotel I didn't recognize. I clicked through the savings account next. Empty. Just like that, thousands of dollars drained without a single conversation. That was the moment when fear sank its claws in deeper than anger. I wasn't just heartbroken, I was broke, and I had a child to raise. I didn't sleep. I lay in the dark, staring at the ceiling fan as it turned slowly overhead. Around 5:30 in the morning, I got up, showered, and packed Aiden's backpack. I dropped him off at my parents' house with a quick kiss and a promise I'd be back soon. Then I drove across town to a little law office near the courthouse. The receptionist greeted me kindly. She was older, maybe late 60s, with silver hair pulled into a low bun and a kind face that reminded me of my aunt. "You must be Tessa," she said. "Diane will be right with you." Diane Roberts was sharp, all business, no nonsense. She wore a navy blazer and looked like she could slice a man down with nothing more than a look. I liked her immediately. She listened as I explained everything, from Cole's absence over the past few weeks to the surprise proposal at the barbecue. I pulled out my phone and showed her the bank statements, then the photos from Jade's social media. I had quietly screenshotted that morning, Cole's arm wrapped around her waist at some rooftop party, the ring flashing in another shot, her caption reading, "He chose me." Diane took notes but didn't interrupt. When I was done, she leaned back in her chair and let out a slow breath. "All right, we've got a few issues to untangle here. First, your husband is still legally married to you, which makes that proposal both tasteless and meaningless. Second, if he used shared funds to buy that ring, that's marital theft. Third, he's been lying to you and very possibly committing financial fraud. We're going to get ahead of this." I nodded, swallowing the lump in my throat. "We'll file for divorce today," she continued. "We'll also request a temporary injunction to freeze joint assets, what's left of them, and block any further sales or major purchases. And we'll petition for primary custody of your son with supervised visitation." "Supervised?" I asked, surprised. "He brought another woman into your shared family space and proposed in front of your child without even telling you," she said. "That's not stable behavior. And if he's draining accounts, he's unpredictable. Until we get a better sense of what he's planning, we protect you and your boy. It was the first time I'd heard someone talk about protecting me in months. By 10:15 a.m., the paperwork was printed, signed, and sent to the courthouse. By noon, I had a temporary freeze on our accounts, and by 2 p.m., Cole was blowing up my phone. First, it was a missed call, then a text, "What the hell is this, Tess? You can't do this to me." Then another, "Don't make this messy. Think about Aiden." That last line, the nerve of it, like he hadn't already dragged our son into the center of this circus. I didn't respond. Instead, I picked Aiden up from my parents' house, took him to the park, and let him chase butterflies while I sat on a bench and wondered what the next chapter would look like. That evening, as I was cleaning up toys and reheating leftovers, there was a knock at the door. I froze, then opened it slowly. It was Cole's mother. "Can I come in?" she asked softly. I let her. She walked into the living room and looked around like she didn't recognize the place anymore. Then she turned to me and said, "I'm sorry. I didn't know what to say." "I didn't know he'd do something like that," she continued, her voice shaking. "I knew they were seeing each other, but I thought it was just. I didn't think it would go this far." "He proposed to her," I said. "In front of everyone, in front of Aiden." Her eyes welled up. "He's not thinking clearly. He's been lying to us, too. To his father, to his siblings." "I'm not excusing it, Tessa. I wanted you to know we don't support this." It didn't fix anything, but it mattered more than I expected. That night, after Aiden went to sleep, I wrote down everything I could remember about Cole's spending, his movements, names he mentioned, people from work. If he thought I was going to crumble and let him walk away with our money and our son, he didn't know me at all. He'd chosen chaos. I was going to give him order and consequences. 2 days later, I found myself standing in the guest room at my parents' house, sorting through the last of the boxes I'd brought over. I hadn't planned to stay there long term, but after everything Cole had done, being in that house, our house, felt impossible. Every room held a memory that now felt like a lie. Aiden didn't seem to mind. He thought sleeping at Grandma and Grandpa's was some kind of adventure. He had a little cot in my room, and Mom had filled the closet with toys from the attic. He'd even declared their bathrooms smelled better than ours, and I didn't have the heart to correct him. On the third night, I heard him whisper, "Is Daddy gonna tuck me in tomorrow?" I froze halfway through folding his pajamas. He was looking at me with those big, honest eyes kids have, the kind that see right through you. "I'm not sure, baby," I said gently. "Daddy's busy right now, but he loves you." It was half a lie, maybe even a whole one, but it was the only truth I could manage without cracking. The next morning, Diane called. "I just spoke to his lawyer," she said. "Cole wants to meet, in person." I took a breath. "What for?" "He says he wants to settle things calmly, but more likely, he wants to control the narrative." I agreed to the meeting, not because I thought anything would change, but because I wanted to look him in the eye, to see what kind of man he'd become without all the masks. We met at a coffee shop near the courthouse. I got there first. It was an old place, the kind with creaky floors and chipped mugs that still smelled like fresh brew. I sat near the window, fingers wrapped around a lukewarm cup I hadn't touched. When he walked in, I barely recognized him. Not because he looked different. He didn't. Same jacket, same walk. But the energy was off. Like a man who wasn't used to losing, finally realizing the game wasn't going his way. "Tess," he said, sliding into the chair across from me. "Thanks for coming." I nodded, waiting. "I think we both know this is getting out of hand," he began. "Lawyers. Court filings. It doesn't have to be like this." I stared at him. "You proposed to another woman while still married to me, Cole. In front of our families. In front of our son." He shifted in his seat. "It was a mistake. I didn't plan for it to happen that way." "Yes, you did," I said quietly. "You had a ring. You had a speech. That wasn't an accident. That was a performance." He paused, then changed tactics. "Look, I'm trying to be reasonable here. We can divide things fairly. You keep the house if it matters that much. I'll take the investment account, and we split the savings." I almost laughed. "What savings? You emptied the accounts, Cole." His jaw tightened. I needed money to get started with Jade. New apartment, some legal fees. My heart went cold. You spent our child's college fund. Starting a life with your girlfriend? She's not just, he stopped himself. It's complicated. No, it's actually really simple, I said, voice steady. You lied. You took what didn't belong to you. And now you want me to just make this easier for you. He sighed, leaned back. You know, you always had a way of making things dramatic. I blinked. There it was. The dismissive smirk. The same one he used when I asked him to attend parent-teacher conferences or when I cried alone in the bathroom after long hospital shifts. It used to make me shrink. Not anymore. I stood up. We're done here. You can have your lawyer talk to mine. Tess, I'm not your wife anymore, Cole. I'm the woman raising your son without your help. And believe me, I'll make sure he knows the difference. He didn't follow me out, didn't text, didn't call. Later that afternoon, I got a message from Jade. It was short. Can we talk? It's important. About Cole. I didn't reply right away, but I couldn't stop thinking about it. Maybe it was curiosity. Maybe it was something deeper. The quiet knowing that Jade, too, had been lied to, used. I wasn't looking for revenge. I wanted clarity. We met at a diner the next day, the kind that hadn't updated its wallpaper since the 80s. She was already there, picking at a dry grilled cheese sandwich, her face pale and eyes swollen like she hadn't slept. I didn't know, she said, before I even sat down. I swear to God, I didn't know he was still married. He told me the divorce was finalized last year. I didn't say anything. I didn't need to. He said you were the one who wouldn't let go, that you were using your son to manipulate him. She shook her head. I believed him. I was stupid. I softened, just slightly. You weren't stupid. You were trusting. She wiped her eyes. He lied about his finances too. Said he was investing in real estate. But the guy doesn't even have a steady job. I found out last week he's been borrowing from his dad. And that ring? She pulled her hand from her purse and slid it across the table. Pawn it. Sell it. Burn it. I don't care. I didn't touch it. There's more, she added. He has another bank account. In his name only. I don't know the full details, but I saw an envelope from a credit union in his car. I took a picture of it. She handed me her phone. I stared at the photo. A different account, different bank, and a statement date that lined up with the same week our savings vanished. Thank you, I said finally. She nodded. He's not who he says he is, Tessa. I don't even think he knows who he is anymore. By the time I left that diner, I knew what I had to do. Diane had said we needed leverage, something concrete. And now, thanks to Jade, we had it. The next step wasn't revenge, it was accountability, and I was ready for it. That same evening, I emailed the photo from Jade's phone to Diane, along with a typed summary of everything she'd told me. I didn't want to miss a single detail. Diane replied in under an hour. Good work. This changes things. We'll subpoena the account records first thing in the morning. The word subpoena sounded heavy, official. I wasn't used to speaking legalese, but I was getting there, fast. And the more I learned, the more I realized how much I hadn't known, or maybe how much I'd ignored. Cole had always been charming, slick, the kind of guy who could sweet-talk his way out of a speeding ticket or into a job interview without a real resume. He didn't mind playing fast and loose with the truth. He used to joke that rules were suggestions. At first I'd laughed. Now I saw it for what it was, a warning. The next morning, I stopped by our old house, my house. Really, though the paperwork still had both our names. I needed to grab some files, a few pieces of Aiden's artwork, and, if I could stomach it, a box of photo albums from the hall closet. I hadn't told Cole I was coming. I didn't think I had to. But as soon as I pulled into the driveway, I spotted a real estate sign jammed into the front yard. I stared at it for a long time. My hands gripped the steering wheel tighter than I realized. There it was, in big block letters, for sale, open house this weekend. A laminated flyer fluttered on a stake beneath it, with photos of the inside of my home, my kitchen, Aiden's bedroom, the master bath with the cracked tile I always meant to fix. Cole hadn't even bothered to tell me. Inside, the furniture had been rearranged. Half our stuff was gone, some of it replaced with cheap staging pieces, fake throw pillows, art prints with meaningless quotes in cursive font. Jade's touch, I figured. Everything looked like it belonged in a catalog, not a home. I took pictures of everything. The sign, the flyers, even the stack of fresh business cards on the counter from the listing agent. Then I drove straight to Diane's office. She was already waiting with a cup of coffee when I arrived, and I didn't waste time. I laid the photos out across her desk like a detective building a case. "He's staging the house to sell," I said. "Without telling me, without my signature." Diane's eyes narrowed. "He can't sell it without your consent. Not legally. This is attempted fraud, plain and simple." My head was spinning. "What do we do?" "We freeze it," she said. "Immediately. I'll file for a temporary court order today to stop any pending sale. We'll also notify the realtor and the real estate board that the property is under dispute in an ongoing divorce case. They'll back off. Nobody wants to be sued." By noon, the emergency injunction was filed. By 3 p.m., the listing agent had taken the house off the public market. And by 5, Cole was calling again. I let it ring. Later that evening, after Aiden was asleep, I finally listened to the voicemail he'd left. "You're making this really hard, Tess. The house needs to be sold. You can't hold it hostage just because you're bitter. I need the money. We both do. Just sign the papers and move on. This doesn't have to get ugly." But it already was ugly. He just didn't want to admit it. I didn't respond. Instead, I tucked the voicemail into the growing file of evidence. Diane was building. Every text, every transaction, every lie. All of it had a place now. Organized, documented, ready for court. The following week, Diane got the subpoena approved for Cole's hidden account. When the bank records arrived, I met her at her office again. The room was quiet, except for the hum of the copier and the occasional turning of pages. "He's been transferring money to this account for over a year," Diane said, tapping the statements. "Small amounts at first, then larger ones. All from the joint accounts, grocery money, emergency savings, even the IRS refund check." I felt sick. That was supposed to go toward Aiden's preschool tuition. She nodded. "I know, but it went toward Jade's engagement ring and Cole's fantasy of a fresh start." I leaned back in my chair. "How much?" "Just under $54,000, she said. I let out a slow breath. I'd expected a lot, but not that. "We'll present this as evidence of financial misconduct," Diane continued. "Judges take this seriously, especially when a child is involved. He's not just being greedy, he's being reckless. And if he tries to sell anything else without your signature, we'll have grounds to petition for full financial control until the divorce is final." A knock came at the door. Diane's assistant poked her head in. "Tessa, there's a woman here asking to see you. Says she's Cole's sister." I blinked. "Kelly?" The last time I'd seen Kelly, she was holding Aiden at his first birthday party, bouncing him on her hip and feeding him frosting off a spoon. We hadn't spoken in months, not since Cole started pulling away. I followed the assistant out to the lobby, where Kelly stood holding a manila envelope and a tired expression. "I'm sorry to barge in," she said softly, "but I thought you should see this." She handed me the envelope. Inside were several documents, emails, old tax forms, and what looked like a handwritten letter. "He's been lying to all of us," she said. "My parents, me, even Jade. I found this stuff in one of the storage bins in his old room. He asked to store some boxes last winter. I didn't think anything of it until this morning." I glanced at the documents. There were receipts for wire transfers to what looked like an overseas account, a printed itinerary for a flight to Costa Rica under a different name, and the letter, a rough draft of some kind, written in Cole's handwriting. It said, "Tess will never see it coming. She thinks I'm still deciding. But by the time she finds out, I'll be long gone. I'm not going to be the guy stuck with a kid and a mortgage." My mouth went dry. "He was planning to leave the country." Kelly nodded. "I don't think he ever intended to stick around. I just wanted to do the right thing." I hugged her. She was shaking. That night, I called my dad, told him everything. Then I sat on the edge of my bed, the envelope still in my lap, and realized something I hadn't fully accepted until then. This wasn't just a messy divorce. This was a takedown, and I was the one holding the match. Absolutely. Here's main idea 5, continuing right where we left off. The emotional arc is building, and now we're entering the turning point where Tessa begins to truly shift the power dynamic. The next morning, I met my dad for coffee at a diner just outside town, the kind with red vinyl booths and black and white tile floors that hadn't changed since the 70s. He was already there when I arrived, sitting by the window with a steaming mug and the local paper folded neatly beside him. He looked up, smiled the way only a dad can when he sees his child hurting but determined, and pushed a second cup of coffee across the table toward me. I took it with a grateful nod and set the manila envelope down beside my purse. I brought the documents. Kelly gave me, I said. Diane's going to review them in detail, but I wanted you to see. He opened the envelope and slowly began flipping through the papers. I watched as his face changed from tired curiosity to something harder, something colder. By the time he reached the draft of Cole's letter, the one where he said he'd be long gone, my dad's lips were pressed into a tight line. He's not just dishonest, he said finally. He's a coward. And now he's scared. I think he was planning to disappear, I said. Start a new life somewhere and leave us behind. Me and Aiden. Like we never existed. My dad shook his head slowly. He's not getting away with it. There was a quiet certainty in his voice that settled something in me. Not hope exactly, I wasn't there yet, but something sturdier. Something like faith. We spent the next hour reviewing timelines, dates, copies of receipts. My dad, with all his years in small-town law, knew exactly what to look for. Inconsistent dates, sloppy accounting, discrepancies that would raise questions, and he found them, lots of them. He's been funneling money out longer than we thought, he said. We'll get this to Diane, but I'm also going to call someone I know at the district attorney's office. My eyes widened. You think this could go criminal? Depending on what else Diane finds, he said. Yeah, he's not just hurting your finances. He's defrauding the court, evading taxes, maybe even committing identity fraud with that flight itinerary. I nodded slowly, absorbing it all. I'd come to this meeting expecting reassurance. I left it with a growing sense that maybe, just maybe, we were turning a corner. Back at my parents' house, Aiden was outside playing in the dirt with a plastic dump truck, completely oblivious to the storm swirling around him. I watched him from the kitchen window as I made him a grilled cheese sandwich, wondering how much longer I'd be able to shield him from everything. Later that night, I sat at the dining room table with my laptop open, reviewing the financial documents. Diane had emailed. That's when I noticed something. A series of small transfers from our old PayPal account, the one we used to split bills before we combined finances. It had been dormant for years, but suddenly, last fall, there were transfers to a new email address. $50 here, $75 there. Nothing big enough to draw attention, but over time, it added up. And the name tied to the new account wasn't Jade's. It was someone else, a woman named Elise Harper. I sat there staring at the screen, blinking. Another woman? I pulled out my phone and searched the name. Nothing at first. Then, a LinkedIn profile. A freelance marketing consultant in Seattle. Pretty, blonde, young. She had a portfolio link with photos of Cole, professional headshots taken just 3 months ago. My stomach dropped. How many lies had he told? How many lives was he trying to live? I forwarded the information to Diane immediately, including the PayPal activity and screenshots. Then I shut the laptop and sat in the dark for a while, hands shaking. Aiden wandered out of his room in his footy pajamas. "Mommy?" he asked sleepily. "Can I have some water?" I scooped him up and carried him to the kitchen. As I filled his cup, I kissed the top of his head. "You're my whole world, kiddo," I whispered. "You and me, we're gonna be just fine." The next morning, Diane called. "I reviewed the PayPal records," she said. "And I've already reached out to the name you found," she responded. Said she dated Cole briefly, thought he was single, no kids. As soon as I mentioned a custody case, she went quiet. So it's true? I asked. It's more than true, she said. It's a pattern. This man doesn't just lie, he builds entire fake lives. That's going to help us, Tess. A lot. Later that afternoon, I was outside watering the garden when a black sedan pulled up in front of the house. For a second, my breath caught. But it wasn't Cole. It was a courier. He stepped out, asked my name, and handed me a thick envelope. Inside, a notice from Cole's attorney. He was filing for shared custody. I laughed. Actually laughed out loud in the driveway, like a woman who had finally gone past tears and landed squarely in disbelief. He hadn't called, hadn't asked to see Aiden, hadn't sent a single birthday card. But now, backed into a corner, he wanted 50/50ths? I called Diane immediately. She read the document, then sighed. He's trying to balance the scales, she said. If he gets shared custody, it makes it harder for you to claim financial misconduct or seek full control of the house and accounts. It's a strategy, but it won't work, not with everything we have. I stood at the window that night, arms crossed, watching the wind rustle through the trees. Aiden was asleep. The house was quiet, but my mind wasn't. I kept thinking about that man, the one who used to hold our son while singing off key lullabies, who danced in the kitchen with me during snowstorms, who once told me I made him believe in second chances. That man was gone, if he ever really existed. And the one left behind? He didn't know it yet, but he just made the biggest mistake of all. He came after our son. Now it was war. The day after that custody filing, I took Aiden to the county fair. It wasn't a grand plan or a way to distract him from the mess. It had been on the calendar for months. My parents had taken me to that same fair every summer growing up. The popcorn always smelled a little burnt, the lemonade was too sweet, and the carousel music never quite matched the beat of the ride. But somehow, it always felt like home. I didn't know how many more moments like this we'd have before court dates and custody evaluations started to crowd in. So I held his sticky little hand as we wandered past the funnel cake stand, and I let him ride the carousel twice, even though the second time made him dizzy. He didn't know about the fight happening over his head. The lawyers, the paperwork, the money. He just knew his mom was there, holding his hand, and that the world was still a little bit okay. That night, after I tucked him in and turned off the dinosaur nightlight, I opened my email and found a new message from Diane. It was short, direct. He's pushing hard, but we've got leverage. We need to talk. The next morning, I was back in her office. She had papers spread out across the conference table and a whiteboard with names, dates, and bank accounts written in red marker. It looked like a crime scene. Maybe in a way it was. He's fighting for shared custody because he thinks it'll shield him, she explained. If he can paint himself as a good dad, a present father, it'll make him look like less of a financial threat. Judges don't like to punish men who seem involved. I folded my arms. He hasn't even called to talk to Aiden in weeks. Not once. We have that logged, but we need more. A pattern. Something the court can't ignore. I've kept all the missed calls, texts, and voicemail timestamps, I said. You think that'll help? She nodded. Definitely. But I want you to keep a daily journal too. Every interaction with him. Every moment he misses. Every day he doesn't show up. Judges care about consistency. That afternoon, I started the journal. Day 1, no call, no text. Aiden asked if Daddy was still on his trip. I told him Daddy was figuring things out. He said he'd wait. It wasn't just evidence. It was therapy. Writing it all down helped me remember I wasn't crazy, that I hadn't made this all up in my head, that he really had abandoned us and was only now trying to crawl back because he got caught. 3 days later, I got a call from a friend of mine, Becca, another nurse I'd worked with for years. She'd always been kind, a little gossipy, but her heart was good. And that day, her voice was tight with something that sounded almost like fear. Hey, she said, I didn't know if I should even call, but I thought you'd want to know. I saw Cole. Okay. He was at the hospital, she said. He was asking about you. Me? Yeah. He told the front desk he needed to check on his wife. Said it was urgent. My blood ran cold. He knows I don't work there anymore. I transferred to urgent care months ago. I know. But he kept pushing. Security had to ask him to leave. That night, I locked the doors twice and pulled the curtains closed. I wasn't scared of Cole, exactly. Not in the way women are scared of strangers. It was different. It was the fear of unpredictability, of not knowing what someone might do when they've lost control. I told Diane the next morning. She made a note, then paused. "Do you want to file a protective order?" she asked. "Just in case." I shook my head. "Not yet. But if he steps 1 foot near Aiden, I won't hesitate." She nodded. "I'll have the paperwork ready if you change your mind." The next few days were quiet, unsettlingly so. No texts, no emails, just silence. Then, on a Friday evening, just as the sun was starting to dip behind the trees, I saw a sleek, black car pull into my parents' driveway. I stepped outside before it could come to a full stop. Cole got out, wearing a button-down shirt, like he thought dressing up would soften the blow. "I'm here to see Aiden," he said calmly. Too calmly. "It's been weeks." "You filed for shared custody," I replied, keeping my voice even. "And you haven't once tried to talk to him until now." "I've been busy, working, planning things. I'm trying to be responsible." "No. You're trying to look responsible." He glanced toward the house. "Can I at least say hello?" I stepped between him and the front steps. "Not without supervision. That's what the court ordered." He scoffed. "You're blowing this way out of proportion, Tess. I made some mistakes, but I'm still his father. And I'm still the one who's been raising him while you play dress up in someone else's life." His face flushed, but I didn't care anymore. I was done shrinking to protect his ego. "You should go," I said. "We'll see you in court." He got back in the car and drove off without another word. That night, Aiden curled up beside me in bed, his small body warm and trusting. I watched him sleep, brushing the hair off his forehead, and whispered a promise I wasn't sure he could hear. "No matter what happens next, I've got you. Always." I knew the next few weeks would be a storm. Depositions, custody evaluations, possibly a trial. But I also knew this. He might have filed papers. He might have shown up in a suit and tried to rewrite the story, but I was the one with the truth. And this time, I had the receipts. The court date came faster than I expected. 1 minute I was collecting coloring books for Aiden's doctor's appointment, and the next I was standing in a hallway with wood-paneled walls and echoes of heels and hushed voices. Diane stood beside me, sharp as ever in a gray blazer, holding a manila folder, thick with evidence. "You ready?" she asked, her voice low. I nodded, as I'll ever be. It wasn't the final trial, just the first custody hearing, but it felt like walking into a war zone. Cole was already seated in the courtroom, his lawyer whispering in his ear. He was wearing a dark blue suit, his hair freshly cut, looking every bit the concerned father. But I could see the tension in his jaw, the way he couldn't quite meet my eyes. Diane leaned over as we took our seats. He's trying to look clean, respectable, but the judge knows there's a file a foot thick with contradictions. Don't let his performance get to you. The judge, a woman in her 60s with silver hair pulled into a bun and reading glasses perched low on her nose, entered the courtroom and called us to order. She had the air of someone who'd heard every excuse and wasn't in the mood for more. Cole's attorney started first, polished, calm, spoke about fatherly devotion, parental involvement, and a desire to maintain a healthy bond. He presented pictures of Cole pushing Aiden on a swing, holding a balloon at his birthday party, reading a book by the fireplace, all taken months before he left. They were curated moments, frozen in time, carefully chosen. Then it was Diane's turn. She stood, cleared her throat, and spoke in a voice that was calm, steady, and impossible to ignore. "Your Honor, we are not here today to dispute whether Mr. Blackwell loves his child. That is not the question. The question is whether his recent actions, financial deception, abandonment, manipulation, demonstrate the stability and integrity required to co-parent a vulnerable young child." She laid the documents out one by one: bank statements, Jade's email, Elise Harper's records, the PayPal logs, photos of the house listing, a copy of his draft letter about leaving the country, each piece its own nail in the coffin of the carefully built persona he was trying to project. I watched Cole's face shift with every document she held up. First confidence, then irritation, and finally something close to panic. Then Diane handed over the journal. My client has recorded every interaction, or lack thereof, since Mr. Blackwell left the family home, over 30 consecutive days with no calls, no messages, and no attempts to check on his son. And when he did appear, it was unannounced, uninvited, and confrontational. The judge held up the journal, flipping through it slowly. Page after page, my handwriting laid bare the reality I'd lived for months. Then she looked at me. Miss Blackwell, she paused. I'm sorry, Miss Chen. Would you like to make a statement? I stood. My knees wobbled a little, but my voice held. I'm not here to punish him, I said. I'm not trying to erase him from Aiden's life. But I'm the one who gets up at 2 a.m. when he has nightmares. I'm the one who explains why Daddy didn't come to preschool graduation. I'm the one who holds him when he asks if he's the reason his dad left. And I don't say these things to hurt anyone. I say them because that's the truth. He's a great dad in photos, but my son deserves more than that. He deserves presence, stability, and safety. There was a silence in the courtroom that felt like it weighed 100 pounds. The judge folded her hands. I've reviewed the documents. The behavior outlined here is concerning, particularly the financial misconduct and the planning to leave the country. While this hearing is limited to temporary custody, I'm granting Miss Chen full physical custody of the child with supervised visitation for Mr. Blackwell every other weekend, pending further review. Cole shifted in his seat, his mouth tightening. Additionally, the judge added, Mr. Blackwell is ordered to undergo a psychological evaluation and submit proof of financial disclosure within 14 days. The gavel came down like thunder. Then it was over. As I stepped into the hallway, I felt Diane place a hand on my shoulder. You did good, she said. Cole brushed past us, not even making eye contact. But just before he turned the corner, I heard him mutter under his breath. This isn't over. I didn't flinch. I didn't follow. I let him go. Outside, the air felt different. Not lighter exactly, but clearer, like something had shifted. Back at home, Aiden was napping on the couch, a worn-out blanket over his chest, and his favorite dinosaur peeking out from under his arm. My mom sat beside him, gently rubbing his back. She looked up when I walked in. How'd it go? I took a deep breath. We won the day. She smiled softly. You're strong, Tess. Stronger than you think. That night, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, trying to let it all sink in. We weren't done. There would be more hearings, more filings, maybe more drama, but for now, for once, I could breathe. And that, I realized, was no small thing. A week after the hearing, Cole missed his first supervised visit. No call, no message, nothing. Aiden sat on the porch steps in his favorite dinosaur shirt, holding a book he wanted to read with his dad. He kept looking down the driveway, like a car might suddenly appear. After half an hour, he leaned his head against my arm and whispered, Maybe Daddy's just stuck in traffic. I didn't know how to tell him that sometimes the people we love aren't stuck anywhere. They're just gone. And they've been gone for a long time, even if their faces still show up on court documents. That night, I recorded it in the journal, day 39 missed visit. No explanation. Aiden cried himself to sleep. I texted Diane, who responded almost instantly. This is good. For us, I mean. Painful, but useful. Keep logging everything. We'll present it at the next hearing. It felt strange, documenting my son's heartache like ammunition in a legal war. But I knew it mattered. Every missed visit, every broken promise. It painted a picture the judge needed to see. 3 days later, Cole finally texted. Sorry, I couldn't make it. Had something come up. Let's reschedule. No apology to Aiden. No explanation. Just cold, flat indifference. I didn't reply. Instead, I printed the message and added it to the growing pile in Diane's folder. Then came the letter. It arrived in a plain envelope, No return address, but I knew the handwriting. Inside was a single page, handwritten. The kind of thing Cole used to do in the early days when he still believed effort counted for something. Tess, I know things have gotten out of hand. I didn't mean for it to be this way. I miss Aiden. I miss our life, the parts of it that worked. Please don't let this become something we can't walk back from. Let's talk. Just you and me. No lawyers. No threats. One last time. Please. Cole, I stared at the page for a long time. It was calm, careful. Probably drafted with a lawyer's help. But there was something beneath the words that felt raw. Maybe regret. Maybe desperation. I took it to Diane the next morning. He's fishing, she said, after reading it. Trying to test the waters without committing to anything. Probably trying to protect himself in case the criminal investigation gains momentum. Do you think he's scared? Oh, I know he is. The criminal side of things had been quiet for a while. The DA's office was reviewing the financial records, but we hadn't heard anything solid. Diane said investigations like this took time, especially when there were offshore accounts involved. But she was confident something was coming. That weekend, I sat down with Aiden and asked him if he wanted to write a letter back to his dad. Can I just draw something? He asked. I'm better at pictures. He grabbed his crayons and made a stick figure drawing of himself on a swing. Above it, in shaky, backward letters, he'd written, I miss you, Dad. Why didn't you come? I folded it up and mailed it with no return address, just like Cole's. I didn't include a note of my own. Let him sit with the truth drawn in a child's hand. Then, Monday morning, my phone rang. It was Diane, and her voice was electric. The district attorney just called, she said. They're filing charges. I sat down hard on the edge of the bed. What kind of charges? Wire fraud, tax evasion, and possibly attempted concealment of assets. The financial records we provided, along with Jade's and Elise's testimony, sealed it. They'll likely issue a warrant within 48 hours. I pressed my hand to my chest, trying to keep my heart from breaking through my ribs. What does that mean for the custody case? It means he's in a corner now. The judge will want to reevaluate everything, including whether he's fit for any unsupervised visitation. I hung up and stared out the window for a long time. The trees were starting to turn, golden and rust-colored, just like they did every October, but I hardly noticed. That night, my dad knocked on my bedroom door. He stepped inside with 2 cups of cocoa, just like he used to when I was a teenager and couldn't sleep. Your mom told me about the charges, he said, sitting beside me. You okay? I don't know, I said honestly. I should be happy, right? But all I feel is tired. He nodded. Justice is heavy, sunshine. It comes with weight. I looked over at him. Do you think he ever really loved us? He didn't answer right away, just took a slow sip of cocoa and stared at the floor. I think he loved the idea of you, he said. And I think when real life got hard, he chose himself. Some people do that. Doesn't mean you weren't worth loving. It just means he wasn't capable of giving it the way you needed. That night, I lay in bed beside Aiden, watching him sleep. His face was peaceful, unbothered by the adult storms around him. I traced the freckles on his nose, the curve of his cheek, every bit of him, a reason to keep going. The next morning, I got an email from the DA's office confirming the warrant had been issued. Cole hadn't been arrested yet, but they were working on it. If he tried to flee, they'd be ready. Then came another surprise. An email from Jade. Subject, for Aiden. Inside was a video. I hit play. It was Jade, sitting in a quiet room, looking directly into the camera. Her face was bare, her voice steady. I just wanted to say something, she began. To you, Tessa, and maybe someday, to Aiden. I didn't know what Cole had done, not all of it. But when I found out, I left. I know that doesn't fix anything, but I thought you deserved to know. I'm sorry for what he did to your family. And I'm sorry for believing the lies. The video ended. I sat there, stunned. It wasn't redemption, but it was something. Later that evening, as I walked Aiden through the neighborhood to see the Halloween decorations, I felt something shift inside me. A small click, a breath. For the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like I was chasing justice anymore. It was finally starting to catch up to him. 3 months after Cole's arrest, winter settled in like an old friend. The trees were bare, the air sharp with the smell of firewood, and the house, our house, was finally quiet in a way that didn't feel threatening anymore. It took a while, but the court officially granted me full custody of Aiden. Sole legal and physical custody with no required visitation. Cole's team didn't fight it. In fact, they barely showed up to the last hearing. He'd already accepted a plea deal. 18 months in a state facility with the possibility of early release for good behavior. He sent one last letter, addressed to Aiden, but I kept it in the same box as the others. Maybe someday he'd read it, or maybe he wouldn't. That part was up to him. I was more concerned about what was in front of us. Aiden started sleeping through the night again. He had new friends in his second grade class and told everyone he wanted to be a paleontologist. He'd even started calling my dad Grandpa Coach after they built a snowman together that was so crooked it fell over before dinner. They built it again the next morning, laughing the whole time. I started to smile more too. Not the polite, tight-lipped smile I wore when I was trying to make everyone think everything was fine, but real ones. The kind that came when I heard Aiden humming to himself in the bath, or when my mom taught me how to make her cherry cobbler from scratch, and we ended up burning the first batch. I'd gone back to work at the urgent care clinic part-time. The hours were manageable, and the patients were mostly regulars, older folks with arthritis flare-ups and parents with sniffly toddlers. Nothing too heavy. It was a pace I could manage, and I liked being needed for something that didn't ask me to give away every piece of myself. One Friday afternoon, I got home from work to find a package on the porch. No return address. Just my name written neatly in black ink. I opened it cautiously. Inside was a small wooden keepsake box. No note. Just the box and something familiar inside. A photo. It was the three of us, me, Cole, and baby Aiden, taken at a pumpkin patch the fall after he was born. I remembered that day. Aiden had been fussy, and I'd been exhausted, and Cole had insisted on taking just one photo. I hadn't seen that picture in years. I tucked the box onto a shelf in my closet. A reminder, maybe, not of what we lost, but of what I survived. Spring came early that year. By March, Aiden and I were spending Saturdays at the farmer's market, tasting honey sticks and picking out flowers to plant in the backyard. I let him paint the flower pots any color he wanted, even when he picked a bright orange that clashed with the shutters. One afternoon, as we worked in the garden, Aiden looked up and said, "Mom, do you think it's okay if I don't want to talk about Dad right now?" I put down my trowel. "Of course it's okay." He nodded. "I think I want to just be us for a while." I hugged him, right there in the dirt, our hands still covered in potting soil. That sounds perfect to me. A few weeks later, I got a call from the elementary school. Aiden had written a short essay for a class project titled My Hero. The principal thought I should read it. When I picked him up that afternoon, he handed it to me, blushing. In crayon-scrawled letters, it read, "My hero is my mom. She makes pancakes on Saturdays and helps with my spelling. When I was sad, she made me feel better. She makes me laugh and always comes back when she says she will. I want to be like her when I grow up." I cried in the car for 10 minutes before I could drive home. Because in all the chaos, in all the moments where I doubted if I was doing the right thing or being enough, there it was. Proof. I hadn't failed. I just kept going. One step, one day, one choice at a time. That summer, we painted the front door a bright shade of blue. Aiden said it looked like the sky. I said it looked like a fresh start. We started a new tradition too, dinner on the back porch every Friday night. No screens, no distractions. Just the two of us, a couple of mismatched plates, and stories from the week. One night, as the sun dipped low behind the trees, Aiden asked, "Are we ever going to have a new family?" I paused. "Do you mean, will I ever get married again?" He nodded. "Yeah, like, maybe we could have a stepdad someday." I smiled. "Maybe, if it's the right person. But right now, I think we're doing pretty great." He grinned and took another bite of his grilled cheese. "Yeah, we are. The truth is, I don't know what comes next. I don't know if I'll fall in love again, or if I'll just keep building this life. Slowly, honestly, for me and the boy who calls me his hero. But I do know this. When Cole brought that woman to dinner and tried to replace me like I was just a piece of old furniture, he thought I'd fall apart. Instead, I rebuilt, stronger, wiser, and more alive than I'd ever been. Not for revenge, not for show, but for the little boy sitting across from me, swinging his legs under the table, who trusted me to make the world feel safe again. And if you ask me, that's the best kind of ending there is. Reflection. Life often unfolds in ways we never imagined, especially when it comes to the people we trust most. This story reminds us that betrayal can arrive not in sudden storms, but in slow, quiet unravelings. For those of us who have lived long enough, we know that heartbreak isn't just for the young. It can come at any stage, even after decades of shared history, family dinners, and promises made under better skies. But here's the deeper truth. Our strength isn't defined by who walks away, but by how we rise after they're gone. For many in their golden years, this tale speaks to a universal truth that dignity, love, and self-respect don't retire with age. They grow, and sometimes they're tested in the most unexpected ways. The lesson is simple but profound. We are never too old to reclaim our worth, to protect the ones we love, to begin again, not from scratch, but from wisdom. In the end, it's not about revenge or regret. It's about grace, and about the quiet power of a woman who refused to be replaced and instead became the hero her child needed most. We all carry that strength within us. Sometimes we just need a reason to find it.